Thanks everybody for joining us tonight. We're going to get started and we'll continue to let people in as they join the waiting room. But thank you for joining tonight's crowd conversation. I'm Gretchen Worth and I'm the project director of the Susan Christofferson Center for Community Planning, which supports New York State communities working toward a more equitable, climate resilient built environment. The Christofferson Center is one of the founding partners of CROWD, which works to advance the circular construction economy in New York State and beyond. And tonight's crowd conversation features Joshua Lee and Joseph Murray, editors of the newly released book, Sustainable Design for Uncertain Futures, Dialogues on Time-Based Architecture. In this book, Joshua and Joseph have included 14 design strategies and presented them through a series of dialogues between leading experts. And in doing so, they show the collaborative thinking needed to address growing uncertainty in the built environment. And then they provide a framework to consider the technical and management approaches that have emerged from these dialogues. So before we get started, a couple of housekeeping details. We'll keep the conversation to an hour, including the Q&A, and we welcome your questions. So please type them into the chat as we go along, and we'll take those questions at the end of the presentations. And please keep yourselves muted so that everyone can hear the speakers, who I now have the pleasure of introducing. Dr. Joshua Lee is an associate teaching professor at Carnegie Mellon Architecture and serves as the track chair for the Master of Science and PhD in Architecture, Engineering, Construction Management programs. His research interests include sustainable design, adaptable architecture, open building, systems-based architecture, circular construction, public interest design, post-occupancy evaluation, and educational facilities. His 2019 book, Flexibility in Design, Learning from the School Construction Systems Development Project, provides a longitudinal evaluation of this innovative and impactful project. Joshua is a registered architect and founder of the Protean Design Collaborative, which in 2022 won the AIA Pittsburgh Honor Award and Social Impact in Design Award for its public interest design work. Joshua is on the AIA Pittsburgh Board of Directors and is chair of the Design Plus Research Group. Prior to joining CMU, he served as a lecturer and assistant director of the Restoration Institute at Clemson University, and as an architect at a number of private firms where he worked on a wide array of projects. Joshua completed his Master of Architecture, Master of Sustainable Design, and PhD at the University of Texas at Austin. Thank you, Joshua, for being here tonight. We're very excited to hear about the book. Joseph Murray is a designer and systems thinker whose projects span user experience, social research, and the built environment. He's worked for architects and engineering firms throughout his career and has developed expertise in building lifecycle management, focusing on long-term change processes at the building and district scales. Expanding on this interdisciplinary approach, Joseph is currently pursuing a PhD in architecture, engineering, construction management at Carnegie Mellon University. His dissertation investigates adaptable building systems and time-based architectural practices. He holds an MA in sociology and social anthropology from Central European University, and he's a board member of the Council on Open Building and is a collaborating researcher at Cornell University's Just Places Lab. He is a co-editor on a special issue of the journal Open House International titled Beyond Single Use, Looking Back and Looking Forward at the Open Building Movement, due to be published in 2026. So Joshua and Joseph are joined tonight by Dr. Jennifer Minner, an associate professor at Cornell University's Department of City and Regional Planning and director of the Just Places Lab, and Dr. Felix Heisel, an assistant professor in Cornell's Architecture Department and director of the Circular Construction Lab. Both Jenni and Felix participated in the book in dialogues about preservation and circular construction, respectively, and both are founding partners of CROWD. So we have people joining us tonight from across New York State and beyond, but I'm based in Ithaca. So I would like to acknowledge that Ithaca is on the traditional homelands of the Gaia-Kahana, the Cayuga Nation. The Gaia-Kahana are members of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, an alliance of 6 sovereign nations with a historic and contemporary presence on this land. The Confederacy precedes the establishment of Ithaca, New York State, and the United States of America. We acknowledge the painful history of Gaia-Kahana dispossession and honor the ongoing connection of Gaia-Kahana people, past and present, to these lands and waters. So thank you all again for joining us. And Joe and Joshua, I'm going to hand it over to you, and really looking forward to our conversation tonight. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Thanks. If you have any questions, I guess we'll kind of run through a fairly quick presentation here of the book. But we're happy to go back at the end of the presentation. I think Jenni and Felix have a couple of points that they want to make at the very beginning, but happy to kind of go back to the slides. If you keep track of the number, just let us know. I think Joe, I'm going to share my screen. Yes. So let me switch. All right. Okay. Can everyone see the slides okay? Yeah, we're good. Okay, great. Um, I guess let's just I'm gonna play a quick time lapse of the book just before we get started, just so you get a sense. This work was a really collaborative engagement with 15 exemplary practitioners and faculty across the globe. And we were very pleased to have Felix and Jenni both as a part of it. What you'll notice as we're kind of flipping through here is that there's a bit of a rhythm. So there's an introduction section, which Joe's going to show you some stills later on. Uh, but each chapter puts two strategies in conversation with each other. And throughout the conversation, there's a fundamental section where we try to outline what the basic premises are for each of the strategies, and then an introduction of each of the dialogists, and then an introduction of the strategies themselves. And then we get into, I guess, what we call the points of convergence and divergence between the different strategies, where we try to highlight what the strategies have in common with each other, where there might be some productive tension. And then in the end, we try to highlight some themes that appeared throughout the book as well. So just since we don't have physical copies floating around, I wanted you to get a sense of what the book looks like. And okay. All right. So the book is really an outcome of a course I've been teaching for a number of years. It used to be called Protein Systems. Now we've adopted the title of the book, which is Sustainable Design for Uncertain Futures. And it does come from earlier work that was mentioned, a book focused on the SCSD project, where I outlined a matrix of the forces and scales of change. And we recognize from that work that there are discrete, you'll notice here on the y-axis, discrete types of change. So cultural change, social change, economic change, environmental change, technical change, and aesthetic change. On the x-axis, there are various scales of change that are happening concurrently. And we can think about kind of the room or the workspace scale, the building scale, the neighborhood scale, regional scale, global scale. To make all of this even maybe more overwhelming, there's also the z-axis. So going into the page, there's the time scale. So we have change occurring across different types. We have change occurring across different scales, and we have change occurring across time. These forces range from the relatively minor, everyday, oops, sorry, kinds of change up to existential threats. But both or all types of change can have really significant impacts on the built environment. So even if it's not an existential crisis, the fact of a child moving into a home and then moving out of a home can have really big impacts on the home. There's overwhelming evidence that our myopic hyperfunctionalism embraced by the discipline of architecture and codified into law is producing enormous amounts of waste and loss of cultural heritage, which this group knows is clearly unsustainable. It is our job as designers of the built and managers of the built environment to accommodate this reality. which is the work of this book. It's also important to note that the negative and positive outcomes are implied in our use of the term uncertain futures, while concerns over existential threats like climate change, pandemics, and runaway AI are certainly worthy of consideration. There's also the potential of unexpected positive developments in terms of technology and increasingly equitable forms of decision making. As a basis for our dialogues, we adopted a pragmatic and discursive and pluralistic approach to thinking about sustainability, and we remain hopeful that we can move towards the ambitious goals set forth in the Brundtland Report to meet the needs of the present without compromising the needs of future generations to meet their own needs.
So I'll pick up here on the structure of the book and get into the content. And so, as Joshua mentioned, we identified these 14 time-based architectural strategies from mass customization to design for disassembly that share the common goal, right, of adding adaptive capacity and addressing the forces of change that he showed there in that matrix across multiple timescales. And we see a great potential in the growing number of architectural strategies that deal in one way or another explicitly with possible futures and in an effort to add that capacity, that adaptive capacity. We call these strategies time-based because they address the forces of change, working across multiple timescales and in consideration of evolving needs. So the central premise of this book is that by engaging in dialogue across time-based strategies, we can develop innovative approaches, new approaches, to address our current needs and manage long-term uncertainties by designing those adaptive capacities and honoring the efforts of previous generations. And we'll get into that with preservation and some of the other dialogues as well. So to operationalize the strategies in combination, we've aligned them to the building life cycle, which you can see here represented according to 6 time signatures in this diagram. And I'm going to go through those pretty quickly just to give everyone a sense of the structure and also what we are trying to operationalize. So beginning with the planning and design phase, where the strategies like mass customization and inclusive design allows designers and clients to build in options and choices right at the very beginning. Computationally responsive environments and smart materials we've linked to immediate change, which are changes occurring in real time and frequent cycles. For example, computationally responsive environments can open or close windows or blinds within seconds of a specific gesture. And some smart materials can change their shape as the temperature or humidity changes. And the signature of intermittent change covers a number of aligned strategies in our book, including open building, metabolism, repair, resilience, and biodesign, which address irregular needs from occupant shifts to disaster recovery. Long-term change is a slower process, including strategies such as persistence and preservation, where structures gain significance and endure over decades or even centuries. And the final phase in these time signatures is end of use and the reuse, including adaptive reuse, circular construction, and design for disassembly, focusing on component reuse and planned adaptability rather than just a linear path to the landfill.
So I mentioned that the book really grew out of the course. And in the early days of the course, we invited guest lecturers to speak to the specific strategies. While we thought this was a really productive way for students to get to hear from experts across the globe about specific strategies, we recognized that it didn't put the ideas in conversation with others very directly. And so the work of this book was really to start to think of ways that we could engage ideas like preservation and circular economy in direct conversation with each other. So we imagined this process. It was quite a fun game, actually, and I would encourage you to look at this diagram and maybe even consider who you might substitute in for some of these experts or other strategies that you know of, and try to imagine what someone who is a advocate for mass customization might say to someone who is very focused on things like computational responsive environments, or smart materials and biodesign, et cetera. But you could, of course, mix up this matrix any way that you find engaging, and maybe resilience and preservation as an alternative might be interesting. Our process was to get this organized. Joe and I played out what we thought these experts might say to each other in conversation. Of course, that didn't quite pan out as we had planned very productively, which was great. There were lots of really wonderful insights that didn't even occur to us that might come out through these conversations. But it was a semi-structured set of interviews. And in the end, we tried to match what we thought different themes might appear throughout the book, which I'll highlight here in just a second. The process was quite long, I guess, in terms of trying to recruit and schedule the conversations. So what we thought was going to be a fairly quick process of producing a book did turn out to be a bit involved. But each of the dialogists were provided with a list of prompts that they responded to before we had a 90-minute conversation. And then Joe and I took a pretty active role in making meaning from the conversations after we transcribed the interviews. One of the ways that we tried to bring meaning to the dialogues was to identify certain themes that appeared. So themes like care, cultural memory, inclusion, etc., were more prominent in some conversations than in others. And so at the very beginning of the book, we have this diagram. So if you're mostly interested in issues related to computational tools, it's a handy reference for which dialogues might be of most interest to you. All right, I think Joe's going to take you just quickly through the book structure.
Yes, and so let me try and do this briefly. It's an unusual format, and so we were it's a very productive, actually, and interesting way to approach an edited book is to make these dialogue pairings. And as a result, there's really many entrance points, many ways to read the book. And we were lucky to work with the publisher on a layout that would accommodate the dialogues and also give us a sidebar. So as editors, we could sort of have a running annotation and provide editorial sections in each chapter. So the book, as I mentioned, is focused on these 14 time-based strategies with 15 leading experts. And it's likely that one or more of these strategies or contributors caught your eye. And so, in approaching the book, we're encouraging readers to just really follow their own path and build up your understanding of them in any order. We've been presenting this work in architecture schools and finding that it's very conducive to giving to reading on several levels, and the fundamentals section is a great introduction, a very quick introduction, and a way to read quickly about what each of these strategies means historically. And we provide also some precedents here on these fundamentals pages, as well as sort of outlining the affordances and challenges, a way of establishing field boundaries so that we can then go about blurring those boundaries in dialogue. So the fundamental sections, those pages are standard, and they're followed by the dialogues, and usually just between two experts representing the strategy. mass customization, we had Avi Friedman and Naomi Kina together. And this is followed then by a short framing statement of their personal understanding of the strategy that they've been asked to represent. And that also was a little bit of a a heuristic we needed to set up early on. Many of these contributors can speak to several of these strategies, and their work, of course, blends strategies in some cases already. So the bulk of each dialogue, the points of convergence and divergence, is then organized by a series of themes Joshua showed in that table, and those cut across the dialogues. And you'll also notice these underlined notes, and that's the sidebar, the annotations I mentioned. At the end, we did ask the dialogists to consider, what might occur if we were to combine their strategies. In the case of our fourth dialogue with Jenni and Felix, there was already a really well-established and productive collaboration occurring. So that was just, immediately they were able to go into shared projects and objectives. But some of them, it really was a new space. And in some cases, the contributors hadn't met each other prior. So we saw many different outcomes. And then we went about a reframing, which is the standard section as well, covering those thematic understandings and also summarizing how the themes can be understood differently through the lens of the two time-based strategies. And we added highlighting to make that thematic coding apparent. Okay, and then we end, and this really kind of helps the book serve as a textbook with a section of further discussions, questions, and recommended readings, chronologically listed for those who want to go deeper into each of these. Did we want to talk about the conclusion, or do we want to go directly into pass this over to Jenni and Felix? Joshua, did you?
Yeah, either way, Joe, just tell me where to go.
I think if I have some notes here, but I think if you could go to the next slide, I'd like to just mention that throughout these dialogues, there was an initial strong focus on material strategies. And since we've had the chance to present the book, the same question has come up a few times for us. What material approaches and assemblies are most time friendly? Like, what kind of who wins this contest? And that's actually what we take up in the conclusion, and it's surprising, and it's a strong message throughout the book, and in a way a challenge. And it's not what you might imagine. So the material question is unanswerable when we're thinking through the whole building life cycle. So there's many right answers, right? It's really a question of when. And so what came up again and again is that what's missing and neglected and addressed in a series of kind of calls to action in our conclusion are the immaterial processes in the platforms, really for an intersubjective process of change management and doing that in a negotiated way. As Irina Bauman, one of the contributors, likes to put it, she says, management over fabric. So we don't have an answer there, but in some ways that's a provocation that we should keep developing. Doing many of the things that Crowd is already deeply involved in, and that Jenni and Felix are working on. So at that, I'm just going to turn it over to the two of them so that they can kind of take this a step further and continue their dialogue.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. I just want to say first, it's been a real pleasure to participate in this project, and to work with you, Joe, and actually introduce you to students. For instance, in my class last year, I think this book is a real resource, and the work that Felix and I have been doing in circularity, reuse, and zero waste development, I think it also intersects not only with preservation and circular construction, but some of the other chapters that you have in the book, dialogues around adaptive reuse and open building, metabolism and persistence, repair and design for disassembly. I think these are really useful discussions, and I felt really honored to be representing preservation in the book. I think a lot of my own research has to do with synergies and tensions between preservation and planning, and certainly there are important tensions and synergies between circular construction and preservation. So in thinking about preservation, I was happy to have the opportunity to think about preservation both broadly in terms of a spectrum of reuse, and then more specifically in terms of the preservation of historic landmarks, the sort of regulatory system within the US for historic preservation. So I'm going to share my screen here, and I know there's a couple things we want to do. First, we want to share a little bit more about our continuing dialogue between preservation and circular construction. And then next, I will want to hear from the audience, and I'll open that up for questions. So let me just share my screen here. Okay, so hopefully you're seeing a series of tabs. What I've brought up first is a white paper that our labs, Felix Heisel's Circular Construction Lab, my Just Places Lab, and then other crowd partners, including the Susan Christofferson Center and Finger Lakes Reuse, participated in. And I think this is an important resource that we developed to talk about a spectrum of reuse and how longevity of built fabric and circular construction can and should be a vital part of local and state policy. So I'm going to pause there and hope that Felix can jump in to talk a little bit more about current developments in that arena.
Yeah, happy to. I think also for me, a quick thank you for the invitation to participate in this book. I fully agree with Jenni's assessment on sort of the relevance of the topics that you curated in this book. And I think the conversation that we've had, the four of us, that then led to the specific chapter, came at the right moment, because we had been working on figuring out what is the exact overlay between preservation and circular construction for a while, but I think to work through it in a methodological way, the way you laid it out, actually helped us also to bring these two topics even closer together at a moment where I think crowd was faced from the outside with exactly that question, right? How can maybe deconstruction and preservation come together? How do we address this question publicly? And so I think that was a really important conversation to have had. And so the key themes that are also underlined in the framework that you have in this chapter, the questions of public policy, for example, right, as one of these key themes that came up in the chapter, then led, maybe not directly, but indirectly also to the projects that we want to show now as kind of the continuing work from Crowd's perspective. And so the white paper that was published in 2024 essentially tries to understand how New York State can lead by example nationwide in combining circular construction and preservation and many other aspects towards building material reuse and deconstruction. And it involves an economic impact analysis where you see the numbers here, that if we were to switch to deconstruction for about 75% of all the residential current demolitions, there's a 3 billion impact in direct and indirect economic impact. And up to 12,600 jobs. So actually maybe more than that, because we are running very conservative numbers here to be on the safe side. And so the outcome in the end of this white paper are 19 policy recommendations that we're proposing to the state and municipal partners, so it crosses different scales, the kind of forces of scales in this publication, and it's been very well received to the point where we're seeing first legislative impacts that take up parts of these recommendations in bills that have been drafted at the Assembly and Senate level in the state. And so this is an ongoing conversation, but I think a really important one when we talk about the questions of scaling the circular economy in this environment, and how can we bring questions that arose from the interview in terms of care and what is the place or in place treatment of materials, what is the importance of local for materials and buildings, and so all of these themes come up in this chapter as well. And I'll pass it back to Jenni to talk about one more project that has been, or 2 more publications that have been in the making in the last 2 years.
Thanks so much, Felix. The other project that we want to mention aligns well with another theme in the chapter, which is inclusion. And this is a resource that was funded through a gift through the Carbon Neutral Cities Alliance, who was interested in going beyond carbon neutrality into social justice. So this is a project in which we looked very carefully at a resource, a city policy framework for carbon neutrality that the Carbon Neutral Cities Alliance had published with several other partners. And we looked across a sort of spectrum or hierarchy of building maintenance, preservation, and refurbishment, to adaptive reuse and expansion to deconstruction, and then the least preferred methods of recycling and demolition. And we developed a sort of framework for embodying justice in the built environment, conceptualizing it as an opportunity to work toward repairing historical injustices that are really embedded in the way that we plan, construct, maintain, preserve, and eventually demolish buildings. So reconceptualizing circularity and preservation as opportunities to really work toward a justice framework. So Dr. Jocelyn Poe, who is another professor within the Department of City and Regional Planning, was really central to developing the framework. And then within this first workbook, we look at more specific ways that communities can consider, for instance, maintenance, preservation, and refurbishment in city processes, talking across agencies to use methods of considering different forms of justice. And it really, again, it puts preservation and circular construction and some of the other techniques that are or strategies within your book into a framework that offers renewed opportunity to address many of the issues that we see in the way that we build, construct, maintain, and tear down or reuse the built environment. Now we're about to launch the second phase of that project, which is about land use transitions. So this is an ongoing dialogue. And the other, I guess the other element I would mention is cultural memory. And I think there's much more to talk about in terms of the sort of embodied labor and knowledge that is implicated in maintaining and preserving the built environment, as well as the skilled labor and opportunities that are needed within circular construction. So I want to pause there. I know that's sort of a lot, and see if we start to get some questions from the audience. If you want to put a question in the chat, please feel free to do so. We can also have a sort of dialogue. I think people are able to turn on their videos and ask questions directly. I do have prepared a couple of questions for the two of you. I guess the first you sort of allude to a little bit in talking about how there were unexpected dialogues. Can you tell us a little bit more about anything that really surprised you in the process of making this book? And were there any arguments? I mean, I know Felix and I have sometimes sparred, just kidding, see that there are different elements of preservation and circular construction maybe that are in tension, and that part of the power of circularity, reuse, and zero waste development is that we're tracking along together with these strategies as a kind of coalition. And, we're not, hopefully it's not a slippery slope situation where deconstruction then becomes the stand-in for preservation and we start to lose cultural memory when we choose to deconstruct rather than preserve. Okay, so I'll go back to the question. Anything that surprised you, any arguments that really broke out during the dialogues?
Well, I just mentioned one sort of revealing situation, and I can't think of any arguments, but Joshua, if you can, there was a lot that occurred over the course of recording these 7 dialogues. So, please jump in. But I'm thinking immediately sort of about attention and a really interesting revealing moment with our second dialogue, open building and adaptive reuse, where open building is a very kind of formalized approach to managing change, and works across building levels. And the dialogists were kind of well, B. Plivio had this basic question that I think really got to the core of like, well, how do we distinguish open building from, say, the tenets of modernism? And that was a sort of a challenge, like right up front when we were trying to define these field boundaries, and it really helped. And it's something that Joshua and I are also like dealing with, because we're both on this council for open building. So that came to mind as like a really productive, just like right out of the gate moment to say, okay, well, like what is open building? What distinguishes it as a strategy, as a formal way of managing change long term, at different across different systems. So anyway, I wanted to mention that, and but I'm wondering, Joshua, what comes to mind for you?
Yeah, I'm having an argument right now, as you can probably see with my intelligent work
Yeah.
place where the lights just shut off on me and there's no occupancy sensor to turn them back on. So when I have a second, I'm going to sneak back over the control panel that's like 50 feet away and turn my lights back on. But in the interim, I will say we had a discussion early on about how we were framing the dialogues and how we're asking questions of the dialogist. I guess I would say the conflict is best revealed maybe in the fundamentals section of each chapter, where we try to establish the kind of major framing of each strategy, and then there's this affordances and challenges section of each chapter. But you can imagine, and I guess we had anticipated there might be more fireworks between you, Jenni, and Felix, because on the face of it, right, preservation is about the continuance of well, I'm sure I'll get this wrong, but the continuance of cultural memory. And if we take circular economy at face value, it's really about materials, being looped back as quickly, or looped back to the point where there might not be any cultural memory. So we had anticipated that there might be a real struggle between the two of you. But of course, you've been working on this before the dialogue, so we didn't quite have maybe the fireworks that we anticipated between the two of you. But within each of the strategies, metabolism and persistence, right? These are sort of strange bedfellows in that metabolism too is about this close linkage between desire for change, whereas persistence is about the continuance of artifacts, right? So there is a inherent conflict there. I'd say what came out maybe more as we've presented this is understanding how within the larger butterfly diagram of circular economy, how adaptive reuse fits within that, how repair fits within that, how preservation maybe fits within that, design for disassembly as a enabling maybe sub-strategy of circular economy. So I think more than anything, we saw this plus that equals, the 1 + 1 = 3 came about more than the conflicts, but they're certainly there. So if you were to take a traditional preservationist and put them in the room with a, kind of a hardcore circular economy, cradle to cradle person, right, I think you would probably run into no more fireworks.
I mean, I actually wrote co-authored a chapter in one of Felix's book that was pretty critical of circular construction and deconstruction as a potential threat, and was also a co-author with Gretchen on a happy case study, and really that shows how this coalition was the birth of the crowd network. So yeah, it's that tension is real. And I'm reminded of Stephanie Phillips, City of San Antonio Historic Preservation Office, who's worked on deconstruction and heritage trades, and how important it is for preservation to be a part of this conversation. And there are other scholars in preservation, I think Susan Ross, for instance, who was part of a special issue on heritage and waste back in 2019 or 2020. So there's preservationists have been thinking about this for a few years now. Okay, are there any questions from the audience?
Yeah, what I would say too, while the questions are coming in, is that I was reminded we had a repair and design for disassembly discussion today in class, and I was reminded about my surprise of someone like Brad Guy, who's been well known in design for disassembly arena and reuse circles, I didn't realize that he actually got interested in design for disassembly because he was interested in the cultural memory aspects that it offered. So I think that was the kind of underlying that we are all connected. We just, we're kind of working from our own um, situatedness, right? And as academics, we are rewarded for siloing ourselves a lot, or we can be. And so I think that's one of the fundamental challenges of the book is that trying to recognize that we have these kinds of common uh, uh, um, motivations, but maybe we're enacting them in different ways, which is great. We're, like I said from the beginning, we're taking a pluralistic approach to sustainability, that we're all in this. And, if you're a circular economist and you want to pursue that, great. Listen to preservation occasionally and about cultural memory issues and see if we can work out some resolutions.
I put this up on the screen just to add sort of a structural view also of how some of these pairings were made. And, with the time signatures, right? So the grayscale here is maybe not super easy to read, but these are the 6 time signatures, and this is what we call the switchboard. But the steeper the angle of the pairing, right? Meaning that the 2 strategies are coming from different time signatures, we felt that was, not mandatory, but that would really help bring the conversation to a new place. And when we're dealing with these, the poly crisis of so many complexities and forces of change, felt like, well, we need to cover, at least through dialogue, as many of these time signatures as possible, right? We can't just add capacity all around. Nobody could afford such a building, but strategically, if we can do these pairings and sort of think across the life cycle, that's really our theory. So I wanted to put that up there.
I see a question in the chat from Noel. What is the largest scale example of a circular economy implementation in the built environment in New York State? And I'll engage Felix with that question. I also know Gretchen might have an answer to this, and Susan Holland might have an answer in this. There's several people in the audience that might have their own sort of answer to this question.
I mean, I guess the question is, how do you measure largest here? I mean, there's the question of, I don't know, is it square footage? Then 2 projects come to mind. The largest in New York City is the Sparks project, which is a huge former school that is currently being remodeled, following the new circularity guidelines of the EDC, so the Environmental Development Corporation, that requires a deconstruction plan and a circularity assessment. And so there's a lot of good work that goes into developing strategies that are not existing in the state yet in terms of actual tools. I think in terms of square footage, the Southworks project in Ithaca might be the largest project in the state, where it's also the fundamentals of the project is how do we adaptively reuse a large former industry building, and how do we implement circularity ideas in the programming and in the training that can happen in these spaces. And then I think in terms of largest, when it comes to maybe policy implementation or thinking through like thinking through a scale that is beyond the single project. I mean, it might be Kraut's impact on like policy going from one municipality to the next, kind of trying to think through, can we adopt resolutions, can we adopt ordinances in towns, in cities, in counties, and how that grows together into a policy network. But these are just some ways to answer this question, which I think is opening a really broad conversation.
I see another really excellent question from Bethany. Thank you for giving this talk. How do you envision adaptive capacity getting integrated into mainstream construction practice? Public policy first, going directly to construction companies, etc. So maybe if we can hear from the editors, and then I think Felix may have a take on this as well.
Well, it's a great question. In part, this is the subject of Joe's dissertation. So I'm sure he's got some really wonderful answers to this already, but he'll be working on this for the next year or so. I guess from my perspective, I would say we're starting the process by educating people about the possibility of adaptive capacity. So training designers to think in time is a great place to start. But this is probably many years down the road, of course, that as you are in practice and making decisions and making provocations. So Joe's, I don't want to speak for him too much, but Joe's working on the campus scale. So one of the great things about campuses is that there's a collective and often powerful ownership structure that can basically just choose to enact. So just as many campuses committed to sustainability by saying that all buildings should be LEED silver or better, right? So kind of policy at that level, at the campus level, is certainly one way. We're probably many years from enacting this in the public policy arena, I would say. But Jenni and Felix have been working at this already, at least from the perspective of circular economy and preservation. So I don't know, Joe, do you want to speak anything about how your thoughts on this? And maybe we'll turn it over to Felix.
Yeah, I mean, it is a little early for me to say that I have a good answer there. I don't. But it's a question that's absolutely on my mind. And so one thing that I'm doing is developing adaptive capacity metrics. So, if we really thinking about this as a facility within the domain of facilities management, but also how facilities managers, communicate priorities, and really, yeah, as Joshua mentioned, I'm working on a campus scale and campus future. So, what are the adaptive capacities of not just a building, but a district of buildings? And I think as we, obviously move into some really turbulent times, that question is maybe going to prompt decision makers to look for new metrics. And so I'm interested in the metrics. I'm also interested in the process, and maybe how scenario planning could be an organizing method for taking this diagram and bringing it to decision making about a campus or a district or even a new building, right? So, but I definitely want to hear what Felix has to say about that.
I'll keep it short considering the time, but I think there's no first and no second. I think we need to the problem is so large and so wicked that we need to do everything at the same time and double that. I think when we wrote the white paper and thought about what could be policy recommendations, we essentially identified 5 fields, and we never thought about these policies as sort of sequential. I think we always thought about these as parallel things that need to happen for the circular economy to work. So we need to build a market. We need to increase the material that is being harvested. But they need to happen at the same time, because if we harvest materials and they don't have a market, it's going to fail. If we do have a market but we don't have materials, it's going to fail. So but these are very different actors and very different problems to solve. And so this is something that needs to build up together and across many different disciplines, and we all need to get out of our silos for this to work.
I also want to acknowledge in the chat a comment from Elizabeth Richardson. Thanks for the resources. I'm joining from the city of Aspen, which is wonderful. The city passed a construction and demolition debris diversion ordinance in February. The Historic Preservation Commission has been included in permit review since a long time. Locally, it's a great example of how preservation and circular economy go hand in hand. I think that's a great example. So it looks like we're running out of time. Typically, we end the session right at 6. I'm wondering if the two of you want to say any last words before we end the session. Any remaining advice? I know there are students in the audience, professionals. One last takeaway.
I just want to say thank
yeah,
you.
go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I wanted to say thank you too, so go ahead.
Well, for me, it's really a special thing to work on this book because, you know, I went back to do the PhD and didn't imagine that I would get to jump into editing a book like this with such an amazing group of contributors and really start to see all of this like happen. I'm in central New York, I'm in Syracuse, so it happened in you know, around crowd, and learn so much from crowd through this process. So it's been really wonderful for me. I wish this project would just continue, but you know, we had to submit it at some point. So thanks to both Jenni and Felix and to Joshua, my advisor, for creating the course.
Yeah, I would say thank you as well. I would say if this book, if you find at least this strategy helpful, this is something that, you know, I hope it serves as an example of what can be done when these kinds of cross strategy dialogues start to take place. And you know, I would encourage you to play the game on your own, right? So pick a strategy that you might not feel you have much in common with, and reach out to somebody and have a conversation, because you might be surprised at how the two strategies might work either in concert with each other or in parallel, maybe in sequence. But what I've taken away from this is that we're all more or less trying to achieve the same things, but we're doing it in very distinct ways, and that's, I mean, I guess, wonderful, right? But as Felix says, it's going to take all of us. We have enormous problems to solve, but you know, doing the best you can with the strategy that you're strategies that you're interested in is, I think, the best way forward.
Thank you both so much for being here, Joe and Joshua, and congratulations again on the publication of this book. Thank you, Jenni and Felix, also for your input tonight and in the book. And there's a link in the chat. The book is available through Wiley, and Joe very kindly has given you a code for 20% discount. So I really appreciate everyone joining tonight, and stay tuned for future crowd conversations through our crowd mailing list. So thank you, everyone, and have a really good evening. Good night.